down by physical location. You might want to do it by division, so HR, purchasing, shipping, manufacturing. So you break it down maybe by your departments, you might break it down by division. But really what I tell companies is, or I ask companies to do is tell me how they view themselves. How do I view myself as an organization? Do I look at myself as a single location, multiple locations? Is it by product line? So however the company views itself, you really need to do that, your risk assessment that way. And here are some considerations when you're looking at your risk assessment. And so you want to understand how material is the activity. Obviously, if it's not material, like the shop out back that's selling goods for a total $100,000 a year, not very material, maybe to your organization. How important is it to sustainability? If we have improper cooking techniques here, I'd say that it's pretty important that we get that right within the food industry. So how important is it to your overall organization? And a great place to start is historical problems. What do your auditors say in terms of management comments? What do inspectors say? What do people complain about? You know, that's a pretty good sign that there's been a problem there. What has broken down within the organization and caused you to stay up at night? So look at that as well, historical problems. Obviously, a risk is any change in legislation or enforcement. You know, as in the food industry here, we're all subject to that, and certainly something to consider. What are the agencies looking at? They're obviously looking at some of the riskiest areas, so that's a great place to start as well. And then any changes. What's changed recently? I mean, as Paul was saying, you know, this is crazy time. We have downsizing. Some companies are growing. I think McDonald's had an increase in their same-store sales this past quarter. Change in operations, new systems, new IT systems certainly causes risk. A lot of times people implement systems, they're not done properly, or there's not proper segregation of duties, or people just aren't trained well on them. It happens a lot. I mean, you need to understand that you have to be properly trained so you know what you're doing within the system. So I had to give an example here because I'm talking kind of cerebrally about a risk assessment. What does it mean? What does it mean? Well, here's a sample risk assessment that we look at. And so down the left-hand side are your risk factors, what I was talking about, the materiality, how important is it to the overall organization. And this is a really simplified one. I mean, there's things that have tabs and macros, and it goes all over the place, but it just depends on how, you know, how complex you want to make it. But really, just starting simple with a risk assessment like this works. You're looking at your risk factors on the left, and you have your functions across the top. And I do 1, 3, 5. Some people do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But 1 being low risk, 5 being high risk, and you basically say what's the likelihood and what's the importance or impact they would have on my organization, and you put a number in there. It tallies it at the bottom. I just did a simple average, and so whatever is above what I say is 3, 5 or higher. So in this case, I don't know if everybody can read this, but manufacturing and production is 4. So I'd say that's a pretty high risk area. Let's do some more research. Let's understand the risks within there. And so what you do is you've got your team together. You have your ERM team that's from all different areas. They do this risk assessment. They say that manufacturing is a high risk function for us, a high risk area. Let's take a step back. Let's sit back with the team and understand what risks really lie in there. And so you're talking about the risks. And now you're going to go and do some investigation. Let's go find out what controls are in place to address those risks. Okay, so instead of saying, we're going to look at manufacturing and look at all the internal controls, here I'm saying, hold on a minute. Look at your risks. So we're looking at manufacturing. Let's understand those risks that got us to our 4 rating, and let's understand the controls that address those risks. So it's a much more streamlined process instead of just adding controls broadly to the manufacturing process. So this is a real simple risk assessment process, but it gives you some idea of what we do and how it really focuses our efforts. Like I said, you know, when you're considering it, the likelihood that the event would happen and the severity of the event, address those risks, come up with a plan. I talked about risk appetite, and so when you do your risk assessment, let's go back here and you say manufacturing, and it's a 4. You identify your risks. You might be 4 risks. Let's say 3 risks that we identify here, specific risks that really got us to that 4. when you're saying there's those 3 risks that got us to that ranking, we need to understand what we have to do with them. So you might say, well, one risk we know and we accept. We just know it's a risk of the business. We just know that our competitors might come in and cut prices. We have to accept that. So you just go, okay, let's just move on with that. The other thing you can say is, we're going to continue to do this function, but let's monitor it. Let's put some controls in place to address that. Monitoring controls are great because you're saying, I understand it, I see it, but I'm just going to check it. I'm going to keep my finger on the pulse there, make sure that it's operating effectively. The last thing is stop activity. Companies that just got out of certain investment activities because they said it's too risky for them. They said we're done with bonds, no more bonds, we're out, or especially municipal bonds, we can't figure those out, so we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to invest in them. So that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do. It's too risky for us. We're out of here. And so, as I said, if you don't understand the risks, or if your team is sitting around and you're brainstorming and you're saying, well, what are our risks? And you get to this thought and you say, I don't know why we said this, but we just know it's risky. Then go out there and do some investigation, and then you start talking about internal controls. So a couple quick examples here on critical control points that we talk about internal controls. So let's say we know that the food processing and the food processing cycle here is pretty critical, and we have a automated meat cooking machine or device. And so it's strength because it's automated. It's great, right? It just repeats itself over and over again. No human error. It just cooks all day long. It doesn't complain, doesn't quit. No problems. The problem is, if you set it up incorrectly, it's going to cook everything at the same temperature, the wrong temperature, over and over and over again. And that's certainly a risk. So what you're going to do is obviously come in with manually and take some periodic temperatures, make sure it's working correctly, there's no issues. Certainly a critical point, but also, I don't know how many people thought about this, but what about the computer controls? What about limiting the number of people that have access to the program that can set that temperature, or make changes to it, or make changes to the source code? So locking down those. Once you restrict user access, you have to worry less about the override capabilities or the risk that you have within your organization that somebody is going to set it up incorrectly. So if you limit the number of people that can do it, then you're reducing your risk as well. And this is an automated control here. Manual control, so putting an item through a metal detector. It's good because the individual can use judgment through the process. Putting it through, does something look weird? Something's just not right about this as I'm moving it through the metal detection process. The problem is, obviously manual controls are a weakness because human error. I don't want to state the obvious, but the other one is that what if the person's not trained? What if they don't know what to look for? What if they don't know how to raise the issues to the supervisor? What do I do if there's an issue here? So that's certainly a weakness to that process. So what do? You want to make sure that the people understand their job responsibility. So constantly training, making sure your standard operating procedures are distributed, they're available, people are talking about them, and they're out there. Also, you want to ensure the metal detector is working. Maybe do a control once a day or a couple times a day. Make sure it's detecting metal. You hate to have that thing not working. So anyway, so those are a couple examples that we really look for when you're talking about internal controls. And there's a couple different ways to do it. I mean, you're obviously just not adding a checklist. You're not adding somebody else reviewing it. But looking at locking down user access rights. Making sure that people are well trained.